So this is called carte blanche. As we were packing up the Chevy with the things I planned to take to college, my father handed me a checkbook from the Stock Growers Bank. It looked odd and official in his hands, legal even, and nothing like the buckets of milk or the hay bales or any of the other things of agriculture that I usually saw him carrying around. Inside the plastic navy blue cover, tucked into the crease, was a stack of bound checks with my name on them. Use these, he said, to buy what you need while you're away. Over the years, sometimes at the end of the harvest, or when the livestock was loaded up and taken off for sale, my father would make vague references about the money he was setting aside for us kids, let's say equal to the price of one calf for each of us, in payment for helping him and mother with the milking and the work in the fields that year. I don't think any of us ever pinned him down about the details. Somehow in our family, and I'm not sure how this was accomplished because I don't recall ever being yelled at about this, but we just understood that to talk about money was low and rude. Also, to ask too many questions was low and rude. So it only followed that to ask too many questions about money was not only low and rude, but also impertinent. But here was the checkbook in my hands, now evidence that the socking away of calf money had occurred. Prior to this, I lived a cash-only life. I didn't need much. I had a little job waitressing at Maggie's Cafe in high school to buy the luxuries. And then as now, I spent most of whatever I made on three things: books, clothes, and music. Even at that moment when I held my first checkbook in my hands, I had no idea how it worked. But once at college, I took to writing checks like a natural, like a real pro. I learned that there were more things in the world to want than I'd previously imagined. Shoes in black, brown, and tan, sandals in low and high heels, dresses, sweaters, skirts, raincoats, umbrellas, hats, makeup and jewelry, books on philosophy and history, albums for bands that weren't even on the radio. And with my new college friends, these were other girls from small towns around North Dakota, and we were all set loose now in the big city of Bismarck. I also discovered eating out. In Napoleon, my hometown, there was pretty much only Maggie's Cafe and the pool hall downtown where you could still get the best order of French fries ever made for 25 cents. But in Bismarck, there were places like A&B Pizza and the Big Boy Drive-In. My monthly bank statements must have read like an ethnographic study of the odd habits and proclivities of this new creature my parents were discovering me to be, a female college freshman. It would have been better than satellite tracking or inserting a computer chip under my skin, because once I went paper, I went paper. I mention the bank statement now only to point out two other amazing facts that I didn't know at the time about checking accounts. That a bank statement was mailed out each month, and that it was being sent to my parents, who I presume studied it carefully. About 8 months into this experiment, my dad called me up and said, "Well, we're closing down the checking account." "Why?" I asked, incredulous. It seemed to be working so marvelously. That's when I learned about the bank statements that were coming to my parents, along with the monthly pack of canceled checks, those little numbered slips of paper that I had wildly signed, torn out along the perforations, and strewn across the counters of stores and restaurants in Bismarck. "But I still have plenty of checks," I told my father. And that's when I learned another stunning thing, that money had to be put into the account to counterbalance the writing of checks. Even before I understood all the intricacies of banking, even after, I still marveled at these counter checks in the cafe and stores in my hometown. I just want to stop here. Some of this is just archaic technology now, but has anyone ever seen these counter checks? Has anyone, do they exist in Iowa? Must just be the strange world of North Dakota, but okay, I'll describe them. In the Red Owl and the Rexall drugstore, near the chewing gum and the cigarette lighters, in Maggie's Cafe, near the mints and the toothpicks in their cellophane wrappers, a tattered pack of counter checks from the stockgrower's bank was always tucked in the crevice between the napkin holder and the cash register. The counter checks were left blank of any information. These were convenience checks for people who may have forgotten their checkbooks at home. Not only the normal place on the check for the date and the dollar and the pay to the order of were left blank, and not only the long line for the signature and the spot marked memo where you could write rent or fishing gear or whatever to remind yourself how you'd spent the money, but also the upper left corner of the check where the account holder's name and address usually was printed, and the long bottom edge of the check where the account numbers were shown. This was all left blank. It seemed like carte blanche, courtesy of the stockgrower's bank. It appears naive and quaint on the surface, but I soon understood that what keeps counter checks from being an embezzler's dream is the safety net of the small town, the merchant's knowledge of all the customers, the families they belong to, and what their history has been. A small town is a claustrophobically finite world. Everybody's watching, everybody knows, and a small town is not a place where you want to start bouncing checks, counter or otherwise. It's like fouling your own nest, or as my father used to say, it's like shitting too close to the house. Always mystified me, that saying. About my own derelict checking account, later I discovered that the banker, Parkus, would call my father when my checking account ran low. "Debbie's overdrawn again," he'd say, and then my father would run downtown and deposit a few $100 more. Years later, my mother told me that they would sift through the checks I had written, $1.25 at Dairy Queen, $2.33 at Village Inn, and shake their heads. They were paying $5 for every overdraft. I'm sure they were devastated by the waste of it, and I'm certain that my father found it hard to fathom why I needed so much in the world in excess of the price of one calf sold to slaughter each year. Everything I think and write about home these days makes me feel like crying, because so much of it is gone, pushed out of the way through the natural forces of time, erased through death. When I remember the solemn gesture of my father handing me my first checkbook as I leave home for college, never to return, although none of us knows that yet. When I think about him rushing down to the stockgrower's bank to deposit $200 more to cover my checks for lipstick or pantyhose, I have to get up and walk around a while. I have to unload the dishwasher or play with the dogs. Because my father has been gone from the world for over 20 years now, and I doubt I will ever find anyone who loves me as much as he did. And that world of home, that world of checks and balances that he believed in has changed so much, beyond anything he would have imagined. When I drive through North Dakota these days, I think of him. When I see the flare pits burning off natural gas around the oil wells, burning off natural resources into the already fragile atmosphere, just because no one wants to slow down long enough to collect the gas, I think of him. When I see the oil and water tankers navigating slippery country roads and read about the catastrophic accidents that result on the highways, when I hear of pipeline ruptures emptying thousands of barrels of crude into a farmer's field, of trainloads of fuel exploding near a small North Dakota town, of fracking fluid and oil and saline water spills occurring almost daily in rural regions where people are dependent on well water, I think about how much this is all going to cost. Because it's a finite world. Everybody's watching. Everybody knows. And I wonder who is going to step forward and pay for all this, to settle the bill when it comes due. And I think I have an idea about who that might be. The world my father trained me to live in is not the world I live in now. So I must shed some of my training. To talk about money, about checks and balances, and who's going to pay for all this is not low or rude. To ask a second question, or a third question, or even a fourth or fifth is not impertinent, because we have so many questions that need asking. That day after my father called me at college to tell me he was closing down my checking account, he said he'd wait a few weeks until all the checks had cleared. After that, for the next few days, I went on a spending frenzy. I bought toothpaste and toilet paper, rugs and comforters and bed sheets, pajamas and bathrobes, nail polish, shampoo and face moisturizer. I bought chocolate bars and camera film and underwear. It felt like the end. I tried to buy everything that I thought I was going to need for the rest of my life. But it wasn't the end. It was just the end of carte blanche, the beginning of resource management, of life stewardship, of understanding limits, of maturity. And I'm not going to beat myself up about not understanding how money worked. Just recently, a friend of mine told me about how her teenage daughter had asked her for money. And when my friend said, "No, honey, I don't have any money," her daughter said, "Yes, you do, Mom. All you have to do is put your card in that machine and it will give you money." So maybe it's just something developmental that we must go through. Like that period before frontal lobe development when we feel as if nothing can touch us or hurt us, and we think the whole world is just a space left blank for us to write our wishes upon. And it would never even occur to us that someone is running around in the background cleaning up our messes, that someone we love fiercely is paying the highest prices just to make good on the things to which we have so foolishly committed our signatures.